There's a pretty one, Ulysses. There it is.
Hello BookTube, I'm Sean Breathes Books. Welcome back to my channel, and this is a Sean Breathes book haul. I've got another stack of 6 books. First of all, and this was probably more than a year ago, I went to this book launch. It's not for this book, but to the second book by the same author, by a British Columbia Cree writer, Helen Knott, and I believe this is her first book, In My Own Moccasins, a memoir of resilience. And I went to the book launch of her second book, and she inscribed my copy to Sean, keep visiting with story. It's a good guest. Ooh, I love that. Forgotten that's what she wrote. I believe this was from 2019, but I can't read that tiny print. I gotta have a magnifying glass beside me when I do book hauls. Anyway, opening couple paragraphs. You can feel a mother's lament in her voice. The tone of her words penetrates the skin and hits bone. It hits something deeper than bone. It hits spirit. The chest feels as if someone is pushing on it with brute force, and that breath, that one breath, is a struggle to get in and get out. Remorse shapes the sounds leaving her mouth, and they become a rough-edged, grief-filled symphony, a mixture of wailing and words that cannot be unheard. You wince. You attempt to display no signs of your internal reactions to the shame that gets caught in her throat. But every hesitation in her story proves that silence can be a tangible beast as it forcibly pulls your head to a lowered position. You feel every struggled sentence as she speaks. Or maybe you have to be a mother to feel it. Or maybe you have to be a mother who once neglected her own to feel it. I think that is incredibly powerful writing. I'm stunned by every hesitation in her story proves that silence can be a tangible beast. Here is a book I lucked out to find at a thrift shop for $5 or less, and it's by an American writer that I know so little about that I don't even know if it's a man or a woman. I've always assumed it was a woman. It is called Angels on Toast by Dawn Powell. It's dedicated to Miss Parker, so that is Dorothy Parker, I'm quite sure. So it must be a woman. There's nothing on the back that's giving me a gender, so I'm going to have to actually Google this person, Dawn Powell. And you Americans are probably all laughing at me. She is female, Dawn Powell, 1896 to 1965. Died in New York City. An American novelist, playwright, screenwriter, and short story writer. Her name was familiar, but obviously not much else. So this is one of her novels. I think I'll have better luck looking it up in her Wikipedia page, just being able to read the date. Angels on Toast. I freaking love that title. 1940. I am deeply curious if anyone watching this has read Dawn Powell, and in particular this novel. And if you have, do you think she would be a writer for me? And would this be a novel for me? Everyone's on the make. There's an entrepreneur who ricochets between his well-connected current wife and his disreputable ex and his dangerously greedy mistress. I don't need to know the rest of the premise. Premises are so silly. Who cares what it's about, really? Let's hear the opening. These are a bunch of short paragraphs full of dialogue. In Chapter 1, there was a bottle of Robinson's B.E.B. right in Lou's bag, but J. Oliver wasn't interested. "The hell with cooping up here in the compartment," he said. "Let's go down to the club car. I like to see people." "I don't," said Lou. "I got things on my mind." The porter brought the ice, glasses, and soda. "Okay," sighed Jay. "I might as well stick around a minute." He sat down and kicked his shoes off. They lay on the floor, jauntily toeing out, reddish-brown, sleek, very much J. Oliver. He crossed his stockinged feet on the seat opposite and viewed them complacently, marked the neat way the crimson clocks in the grey hose matched the herringbone stripe in his blue suit. "Paid $4.50 for these socks," he stated briefly. I quite like that. The next one, I'm going to be coy about the reason I acquired it, is Sarah Waters' perhaps most famous, best novel, a lot of people I know say, Fingersmith from 2002. And I am doing a pseudo-buddy read about this with somebody, and it's going to be surprise who. and when. The who part is interesting. The when part, probably less so, but that's why I got it. And this is the third book in this book haul that doesn't have an epigraph. I've quite enjoyed reading epigraphs to you. It's a lesbian novel. Apparently very hot and steamy. I'm just going to read the opening paragraph. My name in those days was Susan Trinder. People called me Sue. I know the year I was born in, but for many years I did not know the date, and took my birthday at Christmas. I believe I'm an orphan. My mother, I know, is dead. But I never saw her. She was nothing to me. I was Mrs. Suxby's child, if I was anyone's. And for father I had Mr. Ibbs, who kept the locksmith shop at Lant Street, in the Borough, near to the Thames. Mrs. Suxby, that is just quite a lovely surname, I have to say. Lovely in terms of just kind of weird and what an odd surname. Anyway, so stay tuned for a pseudo-buddy read video sometime with a very mysterious interlocutor. This is another thrift store find. This is Willa Cather's Old Pioneers. The first of her renowned prairie novels. So what are we talking about? 20s, 30s? Willa Cather is somebody I always have trouble remembering exactly what era she wrote. It was published in 1913. There is an epigraph. It's cited as being written by Mickey Witch. And here it is. Those fields, colored by various grain. Doesn't sound particularly memorable, but I read my Ántonia for a pseudo-buddy read with Hannah of Hannah's Books last year for a series of such discussions she was doing on her channel, and I loved it. Previously to that, I had a mental block about Willa Cather, and I'm not going to get into it. I've bored you all with that story 100 times, but I no longer have a Willa Cather allergy, and that's why I picked this one up. And anything set on the prairies is of interest to me. Well, the opening paragraph is almost a page long, and I'm going to read it to you. One January day, 30 years ago, the little town of Hanover, anchored on a windy Nebraska tableland, was trying not to be blown away. A mist of fine snowflakes was curling and eddying about the cluster of low, drab buildings huddled on the gray prairie under a gray sky. The dwelling houses were set about haphazard on the tough prairie sod. Some of them looked as if they had been moved in overnight, and others as if they were straying off by themselves, headed straight for the open plain. None of them had any appearance of permanence, and the howling wind blew under them as well as over them. The main street was a deeply rutted road, now frozen hard, which ran from the squat red railway station and the grain elevator at the north end of the town, to the lumber yard and the horse pond at the south end. On either side of this road straggled two uneven rows of wooden buildings, the general merchandise stores, the two banks, the drug store, the feed store, the saloon, the post office. The board sidewalks were gray with trampled snow, but at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, the shopkeepers, having come back from dinner, were keeping well behind their frosty windows. The children were all in school, and there was nobody abroad in the streets but a few rough-looking countrymen in coarse overcoats, with their long caps pulled down to their noses. Some of them had brought their wives to town, and now and then a red or a plaid shawl flashed out of one store into the shelter of another. At the hitch bars along the street, a few heavy workhorses, harnessed to farm wagons, shivered under their blankets. About the station, everything was quiet, for there would not be another train in until night. Well, she just is a gorgeous writer. Absolutely. I'm so glad I got over my hang-up about Willa Cather. She's one of the very best. Next is a Booker Prize-winning novel from New Zealand, The Bone People by Keri Hulme. Keri Hulme died in 2021, aged 74. Her father was British, and her mother was part Orkney Scots and part Maori. Fascinating. And the novel, which I'm not going to read from, is a love story. The opening is going to be a little bit too difficult to read, so I'm just going to skip it. And this I got because my friend Gwen said, we're buddy reading this someday. So, someday we will. And finally, this is the most well-known novel by Saskatoon's most well-known, celebrated authors, Guy Vanderhaeghe, The Englishman's Boy. And I didn't think I ever wanted to read it. I heard, what can I say, mixed reviews? Not not really. I got kind of waylaid. I got kind of diverted from reading Guy Vanderhaeghe because I gave one of his short story collections he published in the 1990s, I think, to somebody who didn't like it because it was too gothic. And I don't like gothic either, and I just assumed that Guy Vanderhaeghe was a gothic writer, which, doesn't turn my crank. But I think he writes in a variety of tones, and the reason this came back onto my radar is because of my friend who was a mystery guest, Christy Jordan Fenton, just raved about this book. And also, Paul of the Mooks and the Gripes podcast raved about it. And I thought, oh my God, these guys don't live in Saskatchewan. I better read this. There's two timelines. One is the 19th century American West, and the other one is maybe early 20th century Hollywood. And something to do with making movies and stuff, which I didn't think I was interested in. But oh my God, if these two people, whose opinions I respect very highly, rave about this, I need to read it. So it was published in 1997. And finally, my last book of this book haul has two short epigraphs. The first is from Benedetto Croce. Historicism, the science of history, scientifically speaking, is the affirmation that life and reality are history, and history alone. The second one, by Donald Crichton, I believe he's a Canadian historian. History is the record of an encounter between character and circumstance. The encounter between character and circumstance is, essentially, a story. Opening 3 paragraphs from chapter 1. Even from such a distance, fine man could smell their camp, the fried pig stink of white men. He took up a pinch of dirt, placed it under his tongue, and made a prayer. Keep me close, Mother Earth. Hide me, Mother Earth. It was light as day, the moon's bright face a trader's steel mirror, the grey leaves of the sage and wolf willow shining silver, as if coated with hoarfrost. Under a full moon it was dangerous to steal horses, even from foolish white men. One of the wolfers arose from his blanket and stepped away from the fire. The one with the ugly hair, red like a fox's, he stood making his water and talking over his shoulder. A noisy man lacking in dignity. It must be a poor thing to be a wolf poisoner, to be ugly, to eat pork, to hate silence. There was nothing to envy those people for, except their guns and horses. Well, I love that. Which one jumps out at you as the book you might be most likely to read first? Thanks for watching.